Greetings and welcome to Chapter 2 of Creativity Forever 24, the ninth annual conference from the Canadian Artists Network. My name is Scott Walker. It is my pleasure to be your host today. I'm the Executive Director of CAN. It is a great pleasure once again to welcome artists from coast to coast to coast to Chapter 2 today. And let's start by acknowledging that we live, work, travel, and create on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples who have cared for this land, now called Canada, since time immemorial. We acknowledge this as part of our covenant with all Indigenous nations to share, respect, and protect the land in the spirit of peace and friendship, and to honor the future generations of all of our nations. I just want to tell you that we have added a feature today for anybody who has trouble hearing. For example, we have one panelist today with a very quiet voice, and he will explain why. You will find an option for closed captioning on your panel, and if you would like the additional assistance, you can click on that. So today we're going to talk about new directions, changing your creative process. But first, we'd like to kind of get in the mood by showing you the results of 4 young artists who headed off in new directions, specifically in film and television creation, with the help of our Artist to Artist mentoring program.
Josephine, will you marry me? That's not enough. Josephine, please spend the rest of your life with me.
It wouldn't look like me.
No, but it would look like me.
Jill.
Josephine. I want to keep him.
Welcome to Lady Boring's Academy of Traditional Wisdom for Young Ladies.
You should have read that this is a technology-free boarding school. Wait, what?
Welcome to Lady Ada's secret society. Secret societies have rules.
The best ideas are the craziest ones. Ava! If it doesn't exist, invent it. She who codes is queen.
Ava's been compromised.
Don't panic, but that's the obvious thing to do right now.
I need a paper bag.
Be brave.
You clearly like him. Go, ask him out.
You didn't know what to say.
Say, what if I mess it up? It's a conversation, not rocket science.
I'd rather do rocket science.
Pine uses this school as a cure for girls who are addicted to technology. She is condemning us to a life in the past, and she must be stopped. She will never take my video games! Nah, wasn't mounting anyways.
Okay, well, literally, can you stop?
Oh my God, please stop.
They're here.
Who's there?
Jeff's family. How long do you plan to be here?
For as long as you need us.
I'm surrounded by people all the time.
Sorry.
Will you give this woman a break? Her husband just died. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Can I get you a cookie or something? Invited themselves in and made themselves at home, and I just want to scream, leave me alone.
Don't you just love it?
You're done in there. No, that helmet's going right through me.
I hope you have enjoyed that. Congratulations to those four very talented artists, our former mentees of the Artist to Artist Mentoring Program. Just so you know, Dorothy A. Adabong's Eye of the Veil is playing film festivals now. Shannon Fuster's Lady Ada's Secret Society is streaming on Marble Kids. Helen Juvenon's You're Never Alone is streaming on the Stratford Festival's Stratfest at Home platform. And Sonia Gamidi's Outside My Window has won awards at festivals in North America and Europe. All four of them are winners of the Cale Chernin Award in Media Development, and CAN is very pleased to be a partner in the Cale Chernin Awards. We provide a mentor to the winners each year. Going to meet another of the Cale Chernin winners on Friday when we talk about mixing the generations, creativity and mentoring. Now, going back to Monday, the topic was Art Equals Life, the health benefits of creativity. And panelist Claire Wooten talked about how her former students had developed careers in which they combined many different artistic and sometimes not artistic pursuits, and she gave it a name. She called it having a portfolio career. And for many of us, that was kind of an aha moment. Wow, that's what I've been doing all my life, and it has an official name? I thought it just meant I didn't know what to do when I grew up. Well, today, that's one of the things we are going to be talking about, portfolio careers. We're going to enjoy the panel discussion right through till about the top of the hour, and then we'll begin our breakout sessions. So let's get going. Our moderator today is a friend of long standing of mine. I first met her when we were both starting our portfolio careers. She started as a dancer, became an actor as well, an arts consultant. Until recently, she was the executive director of the Dancer Transition Resource Center. Please welcome Amanda Hancox.
Thank you very much, Scott. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. And so why are we talking about creativity forever and new directions and changing our creative process? Why is maintaining our creativity so important as we age? Well, for one thing, studies have shown that people, no matter what their age, who are involved in a creative pursuit have less anxiety and less depression. For artists, our creativity is how we thrive. It's how we express ourselves in our mind, body, and soul. So how do we navigate this as we age? With me today to talk about this very thing, we have three gifted artists, Marie-Josée Chartier, Millie Risford, and Peter Rowe. Marie-Josée Chartier is a versatile artist whose talents transcend the boundaries of dance, music, opera, and multimedia. She moves fluidly between her roles as choreographer, director, performer, vocalist, and teacher. Choreography is greatly influenced by contemporary visual art, music, and literature. And Millie Risford has maintained an artistic practice for over 60 years. She also has an MA in art history from Queen's University, and over her long career, she has had over 50 solo exhibits. Her paintings can be found in major public collections in Canada and abroad. Millie is also a writer, an advocate for artists' rights, a lover of hope, humor, and best of all, for us, color. Peter Rowe is a veteran filmmaker whose career began in the 1960s. While filming an episode of the series Angry Planet, which he produced and directed, he ingested sulfuric acid on a volcano in Vanuatu, which destroyed one of his vocal cords. Forced to curtail most of his filmmaking activities, Peter has transferred his creative passions to his writing, painting, and music. So, welcome to all three of you. Very happy you're here to talk about this topic. And so we know that you're a very prolific and multidisciplinary artist, and I'd like to just turn this conversation on its head a bit and ask, if art hadn't been your path, what might you or would you have chosen? Marie-Josée.
I don't really know. There are times where later in life, I think medicine was kind of interesting to me. But I think it is because when I think of the profession of dance and what we're dealing with the body and the mind and the connection, and it always brings me back to, you know, the intricacies. And also as dancers, we go through several injuries. So you kind of have to learn about the body. And to me, that's all connected. So there are a lot of elements in medicine that I'm fascinated with. Probably more like a GP, not so much a surgeon, but more like talking with people and trying to figure out what's going on. So if it was not in the arts, but it's kind of hard for me to imagine not being in the arts.
Millie, have a thought?
Well, the first thought that came to mind was death. You know, I mean, really, I could never imagine not being able to use, to be involved in creative thinking and exploration one way or another. I can't see myself as a scientist, but who knows if I had to go down some other path, who knows? But really, it's very hard for me to imagine. There are so many arts, there's so many ways of being creative.
Yeah, I agree. Peter, have you any thoughts on that?
I'd probably end up as a boat skipper because I, in fact, do work as a charter boat skipper, and maybe I could have made a living out of that. But doesn't pay very well, so perhaps more sensibly journalism. My father was a journalist. My daughters are both journalists, and it skipped me, but I suppose I could have done that instead of doing what I did do.
So I think we're all, you know, even if we're not looking at a creative art, we're looking at something that's creative. And Millie, you said to me that creativity is not just an artistic venture, but it's a life process. And I just wonder how your creative process has changed with age, and what specific life events or realizations do you think triggered those changes?
Well, I think I've always been open to change in my work, which has been very physical. I've usually worked a very large scale painting. Physical things have entered into the picture. Starting, I remember after doing, at the end of the 70s, after a successful run with some beautiful paintings, looking at some of them on the wall and saying, my God, how long am I going to have the stamina to do this kind of work? And 10 years later, I had to face the fact. Came into my studio and realized that my knees would not bend. I would not be able to get down on the floor because I've always, up to that point, for most years, had been stretching my canvas on the floor so that I could get into the middle of it and control the fluidity of the paint, and gave me a lot more freedom to work. And my knees just said, no, can't do this. My lower back also was getting stretched right out. So I had to change. And fortunately, always underlying all of the work that I did was the grid, the simple orthogonal grid, from the time I was a student. And so I decided to start working directly with the grid, using it as a structure for the color things that I wanted to explore. And that's what I did for the next 20 years. Now, my back is feeling better, lots of physiotherapy, lots of Tai Chi, yoga, woman on weights, everything that I can do to keep my body in shape. And so now I am back to occasionally stretching canvases on my painting board and working that way, and going from one way of working to another. So I don't like to stay in one spot for too long. So it's been constant on the move.
Yeah, I think we do face this change, and it's, you know, some of it is physically driven and some of it is choice driven. Peter, can you, I know you had to make a very big change in your career. Can you talk a little bit about how you came from moving from your film work and into your writing and your painting?
Sure. I guess I would start by saying I've only had one day of a real job in my life. I mean, I had real jobs when I was a student at A&W, making hamburgers and things like that. But after leaving school, I only had one day. I worked at Canada Packers, and I was driven there by my next door neighbor who worked there, and he drove me there. And I worked the day. On the way, he picked me up and we drove back home. And on the way home, he went into a long story about how when I was 65, I would be able to retire. And he told me what the pension plan would be. At which point I realized this was not for me. Since that day, I have never worked in a real job, although I've had dozens and hundreds of jobs, none of which lasted for more than a month, a few months. They were all on contract. I mostly worked in drama until the late 90s, when it really appeared that drama was at least temporarily subsiding and documentary was succeeding. And so I moved from drama to documentary, which was a pretty big change, but still in the world of film. I made a television series, which I produced, directed, and shot, 49-part series called Angry Planet. It's now on YouTube. It can be found there. It's on many, many networks. On one of the last episodes of that series, I was filming on a volcano in Vanuatu, in the South Pacific. While there, I ingested sulfuric acid, which sent me into hospitalization for a year and ultimately destroyed one of my vocal cords, which is why I talk like this. If you can't hear me, all I can suggest is try and turn up your volume out there, because it's all I got. But obviously, this meant that my days shouting action were numbered, because mostly my voice is not great as a film director. And so, although I've made a few films since, basically I had to transform myself into something else. And what that was primarily an author. And so since then, I've written 5 books, 4 of which have been published. The latest of which is hopefully will be published in the next year. I'm not alone in this. Many people have to transform their lives because of things that come at them from afar. Maybe some of the part of the viewers of this seminar are people who've been forced to change their lifestyle and their careers, and maybe our stories can be of some help to them. We'll see.
Thank you.
Well, I will tell you about something else, but perhaps you'd like to move on for
Well, I just go to Marie-Josée, and you seem to have added things to your, that seems to have how you have changed your creative career. You've just kept adding things to it. Can you talk about how that happened?
Well, yeah, I think it was almost a natural extension because my interests, I started dancing really late, and it was a little bit almost by accident. I saw an ad in the paper in Montreal, and I didn't know if I wanted to go into acting or into singing or anyway. There was this school that offered dance as a primary formation, but we also had music and voice, not musical theater, more like contemporary. And I was 19 and 20, and I just kind of loved it all, but obviously chose dance. And so I think parallel to developing as a dancer and later on as a choreographer, there was always, I was kind of always in pieces that were theatrical. I studied singing all this time. I think the dance always remained my foundation, but in a way, I'm kind of grateful that just maybe 20 years ago, I started working more closely with composers and musicians in terms of contemporary opera. And that kind of started to be something that became quite present in my career. What's interesting is I think it's also my personality. It would be really, I start to imagine, yes, well, I think I would be bored doing one kind of thing because I'm very curious about all kinds of things and I can't really help myself. But to go back a little bit to the creative process, I think over the years, the creative process also changes with every project, even for myself as a choreographer. And then when you start working with collaborators, you kind of have to be very creative in decision-making and how to make a big work, and you have a lot of elements. But I believe that the dance is almost, the movement is always my foundation, no matter which lane I choose, because I think it's really informed by that. I keep adding because the reality is also, I would have loved to continue making the big works that I used to make in the 90s and the early 2000s, but the economic situation and some of that has kind of forced me to also kind of reduce. And it's kind of a compromise that I don't like, but you either stop altogether. If I didn't have any desire to create, it would have been actually much easier. I could have just stopped. But the compromise of, dance is very expensive. It's you can't do it alone. Even if you do a solo, you still have to have collaborators. So dance is very expensive. And once you have your product, once you have your show, and you want to show it and you want to tour it. So if you have extensive sets or things that it's quite demanding. So there came a time where that didn't really become possible anymore. So I had to kind of change the way I made work. You were talking about the canvases, finding smaller canvases. So I kind of had to imagine how this choreographic world of mine needed to be different. So it's part of also reality, when it was not my first choice, but the other lanes really helped me to stay creative and to keep the dance as alive as the other kind of directorial jobs. So yeah, I keep adding because why not? As long as people will want me.
That's true. So, as you're looking at what your next project is going to be, or what is it that inspires you? Where do you get your inspiration from? If you're feeling like you're not sure where you're going next, or what is that spark? Where do you go? What do you do? Anyone? Yeah, Millie.
For me, it can come from anywhere, because right from the very beginning of my artistic career, I see myself as a transformer of energy. And it doesn't necessarily have to occur in painting. I mean, it just occurs in the life of being an artist and having that need to create. So it opens, and freedom is an important word to this. It opens me to being able to take in things that are meaningful to me at a particular moment or particular period of my life, and use them. And certainly unlike Marie-Josée, I'm not a multidisciplinary artist. I'm definitely an amateur of all of the arts. I have dabbled in all of them and done things in all of them, but I am totally obsessed with color and paint and what can be done in that challenging arena of two-dimensional surface, which is, I'm not reducing the sizes of my canvases. I work from small to large and back again. It was a challenge for me to start doing smaller paintings after many years of doing only large ones. But I bounced back. I have deliberately challenged myself along the way with different formats, different ways of working, and still staying true to my central focuses.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that answered the question. I think I sort of meandered off in all directions, as I am wont to do.
Well, that's the creative power that you have. And Marie-Josée, where do you find your inspiration?
Some of my biggest sparks have been contemporary art, actually, visual arts. That's where I started creating, way back in the 1990. I remember seeing an image of a Francis Bacon painting, and it spoke to me so directly. It was very, very visceral, and that's kind of where it started with. And I really went into that world, and that kind of opened up to a lot of contemporary artists. And when I traveled, that's kind of like my go-to place before I would go see a dance show, or is to go to galleries and museum. And for me, it just gives me so much information in terms of space and dynamic composition, that and contemporary music as well. I would say more than dance. Sorry, fellow dancers. It's really been, I think more in my work in visual terms than it's physical, but I always say the movement to me comes last. It's the most challenging part for me making work, is what is the movement, what are those bodies on stage are going to do to express what I want to, what I want to develop. The art and also personal life. There's been things in my personal life that have been huge triggers to create the beginning of a piece, and then it transforms. So that's always still happening, but I kind of shut myself down a little bit because I still want to do those big pieces, and I know I can't anymore, just because for technical, practical reasons, not for the lack of ideas.
Peter, what about you? Where do your creative juices come from?
Well, I think that the advantage of diversification is that if you're not inspired to make one kind of creative endeavor, then you move to another. And so, frankly, none of us at our age are at the peak of being likely to receive commissions from the marketplace the way 40-year-olds are. And so we have to, I think, diversify, which is perhaps the point of this whole seminar, and the one thing that perhaps the viewers can get out of it. For me, I diversified. I still make films. I'm making a new film right now. I just finished a new book. I paint. I started 2 new paintings just last night, actually. And for a while, I was very keen and serious about music and the guitars. You can see a few of them back there. And songwriting. Now, because I have a big impediment, which is my voice, I certainly can no longer sing, and I cannot speak well enough to be able to command a film set. But by diversifying, I think that I'm able and enthusiastic about doing whatever kind of creative activity I can do. And you know, there are people who are forced to change course in their later life. My latest book is about Roman Polanski. Now, Roman Polanski was forced in the mid-90s to start all over again. He had to leave, or he felt he had to leave the United States. And he returned to France, and he managed to recreate his life in France, which he could not continue in the United States. And you know, I'm very actively looking at the career of Buster Keaton, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. Buster Keaton kind of was forced to recreate his career in his 30s. He didn't do it as well as people have today, but today it's pretty common. And by perhaps examining some of the careers of previous artists, who both successfully recreated themselves like some of you, and like Roman Polanski, and the ones who weren't able to successfully recreate it like Buster Keaton. Perhaps there's some lessons to be learned.
Yeah. Millie, you have something to add?
Yes, to sort of add on to what I was saying earlier and what Peter just said about switching to writing. When I was in my 60s and my career seemed to be languishing, nobody was interested in what I was doing. I didn't have a gallery. None of the galleries were interested in what I was doing. And I was still painting, but I decided, even though I had never been able to afford to study art history, to go back to school. And so I did. And then when I did the thesis, I thought, well, okay. And I fell in love with Renaissance, with Baroque, with medieval art and architecture, with critical thinking, with all of it. Did a thesis, and thought that maybe writing will be easier on my body, and maybe I'll find out what I'm doing here. Well, actually, I did. It was interesting because when I finished the thesis, which I loved the process, as agonizing as it was and as difficult as it was it was really hard on my back, sitting and doing all the research and writing. And but I loved the whole process. But once I I defended my thesis. It was over. I went back into the studio, and I didn't even allow myself to think ahead about what I was doing. I just started stretching canvases, not knowing what I was going to do. Why am I stretching canvases? Because I feel like stretching canvases. So I continued stretching canvases. And then really not even without asking myself what I was going to do, I started doing these, what I call breathing space paintings. Call them that after the fact, perhaps, but the name came on really early. It was a whole different way of working for me. I gessoed the canvas, which was something I never did before because I work with acrylics and you don't really need to. And it was a whole different way of working. And I started doing these vertical stripes. Call them stripes if you like, but they were spaces to me. And it was a whole process of just getting back into something that my body and other parts of my mind that were well behind the conscious mind were saying, this is where you belong. And in the process, I discovered, okay, this is where I started, and this is where I'm going to continue. And I am going to be as open to working as I always have considered myself to be open, but I will always be driven into certain places because that's where my head's at. That's where my obsessions are. That's where the big questions I have are. And also, yeah, what I want to see on a canvas. So I'm just sort of like a puppet, you know, really.
Do you think that that break doing your MA, if you hadn't done that, would you have come to the same realization? Like, how important was that break and that the study that you did and your thesis?
It was really, really important. I think I would have fallen into an even deeper depression, and depression is something I've suffered plenty of, and I think I would have been quite lost. But it really jump-started me and got me feeling, okay, I now know who I am, and very quickly, and I will continue this story because I think it's important. Very quickly, I decided I've got to have a website. I don't have a gallery, I've got to have a website. And I did a website, and about a month after it was actually online, I went to an opening of the work of a friend of mine, an artist friend of mine, and he introduced me to the dealer as one of the best Canadian painters there are. And I had a card with my website address on it and gave it to this art dealer. And art dealers don't like cold calls from artists. Absolutely not. You can't do that. So I had this friend who gave me a good informal introduction and the website, which meant they could check me out at length and if they were interested, find other things online. And that resulted in me getting into a gallery that was looking for a senior woman artist. Now, aging is an interesting thing. In all of the fields, most of the time, you're not an emerging artist anymore, or you're losing your stamina. You've got these issues to deal with. But in the visual arts, there's been this discovery of woman artists, and it goes back to Linda Nochlund's very influential book, Why Are There No Great Women Artists? And that triggered off a whole avalanche of rediscovery of women artists throughout history. We're familiar with it now, but when Nochlund's book was written, published in 71, I think, there were no great woman artists in art history. So here I am, just one of the lucky people who's actually now able to get my work out there because there's an interest in senior woman artists. So I consider myself extremely fortunate, not unlike so many of the other arts that are just not kind to aging artists.
Yeah, I remember when I was still acting, I was in my early 40s, mid 40s, and I'd get the sides for a role to audition for, and it would be for a grandmother. And I thought, I was like, I don't look like a grandmother. I'm only in my 40s. It was just this really bad time for a woman in the film industry as an actor. If when you hit your 40s, hopefully that's a little bit better. And I think we've seen, all of your, Peter, you were talking about how the film piece was going down, but then documentaries came up, and Marie-Josée, you were talking about how big productions have sort of gone by the wayside and you've had to go smaller. I think we're all faced with these times when, we're at a bit of the whim of the wind that's blowing and what's popular and what's not. So it is something that we all have to navigate in some way. Just thinking about how important, and Millie, you said something about freedom earlier, and how important freedom is. And however, I'm thinking both about the limitations of too much freedom and, the sort of the limitations rather, and then having sometimes too much freedom. For example, the limitations might push you into some other way of looking at something, as you were saying, Marie-Josée, when you couldn't do the big productions, you had to look at something else. And, sometimes too much freedom, it's hard to focus on what it is you want. And I know, Marie-Josée, you have a story about when you had the resources and, plenty of music, and then got into the studio and thought, okay, now what do I do? I wonder if you could just talk a bit about that kind of freedom.
Wish we had too much financial freedom.
Yeah.
Then there would be a lot of freedom. No, just in terms of projects. Yeah, there was a time where I was given an award by Soul Pepper, a small award, which actually was very, ended up in a really long-term kind of project, but I was given a studio. It's not a huge thing when you think about what's out there. It was 7 days in the studio. I had my card and I could go in and out when I wanted. And it was at a time too that I had to, reassess what kind of work I could make realistically, not what I wanted to wait and not what I could make with the artists I know, but again, going back to where do we present it? How can we tour it? It's just overwhelming. And yeah, I didn't really have a seed of an idea at all at the time. And I went in the studio and it's the resources of a space and time is invaluable. And this time, for 2 days, I just sat there. I looked at videos I hadn't looked at in 3 years that I had made a residency in Berlin. And then came the idea of all these beautiful pieces of music that I like that are miniature, because it's completely the opposite of what I've always made, 60, 90-minute works, long pieces of music, one idea that just kind of develops over time with slowness. And so this was completely different piece that was 3.5 minutes, 8 minutes, but they were all by composers that I know, that I love their music. And I thought, just sitting there, and it's slowly kind of over the week, like these ideas of why don't I make, I called it Petite Danse. And it was a concept where the music and the dance, I had 4 pieces of original music and 8 dance pieces, and each piece of music had 2 dances in the same program. So basically the audience would would hear the same piece of music with two different choreographies, and they wouldn't even notice it was the same music. So there was a whole psychological thing that was kind of great to work with. But the format allowed me to work with about 12 or 13 performers, some dancers and actors. And then over time, the idea of taking that template and then offering it in other cities. So be invited in Winnipeg, and I work with 13 performers from there that I knew. So it would be produced there. It would be rehearsed there. And the same thing in about 7 cities where I took the concept and then work locally with a co-producer. And so I had to be very creative in how these pieces were made. I had small pieces of set that could travel easily, like little benches, wire. So each tableau had a visual element because I really can't get away from it. And costumes. How am I going to make costumes going to fit all these people? So even the way I was imagining the costumes, and each dance, it was from a solo to an octet. So there was a solo, duo, trio, quartet, all the way to 8. And so when I was invited, auditioning people, so in a way, I had to keep reinventing this work with every city, readapting it to the dancers that I would find. So this has been, ongoing. I still miss doing the really big works, though. I will always miss it because for me, I think it's part of how I like to explore my own kind of imagination. But it's been fruitful. It's been an interesting process.
Any other thoughts on Frida, Millie?
Yeah, I don't know how I could have forgotten this. I mean, the first thing that came to mind with the question is there's never been enough economic freedom. That's been a problem. When I was a student, it was a problem. It was a problem before I was a student, as a matter of fact. Been a problem all my life. But one thing that I did in the 90s was my husband and I were sitting out having a glass of wine before dinner and talking, and I was sort of complaining about the fact that I couldn't afford to visit my artist friends spread all across the country. I live out in the country. They live all over the place, from across Canada to the States, and people that I was afraid I was going to lose touch with. And wouldn't it be lovely if I could find some way of getting them all together? Well, my husband was working, doing some plumbing for a set of 4 new cottages that were being built on a small lake north of us. And he said, they would be perfect. They would be perfect to do a workshop. So I went out and checked them out, and sure enough, they were. And because these were brand new, I managed to book them for the next summer for the first week of August. And that gave me time to figure out how this 1-week workshop was going to go, how it was going to satisfy everybody, and with people coming from all over and different means. And so I had to organize, do a lot of logistical planning for this. And each of these cottages was large enough that you could work indoors or outside. There's lots of great outdoor space. And that was a successful venture that got me together not only with women that I had known for years, but introduced me to new artists, new women, because there would be recommendations. And I would ask everybody, just anybody who you think might be interested in spending a week with 7 other women artists, where we get to work all day, have dinner together, show our work, and that was all programmed, and have a visitors night, and go for a swim at the end of the day. I mean, it was fantastic. And it went for 7 years and only ended because the property was sold. But, you know, so you use your freedom, the creative drive that you have in as many ways as you can.
Yeah, I think, you know, you've both shown good examples of when you've had a limitation and you've used your creativity to solve that problem. Yeah, it'd be wonderful if we just had all the money and resources we needed, but you know, good for you for creating the space to do what you needed to do. Anyway, and just thinking also about, when I think about freedom, I think about, you know, how when you're 5, you don't care what anybody thinks about, you know, you create, you make mistakes, you don't care, you're not looking at what somebody else thinks about what you're doing, you're not comparing yourself to anyone else. And I think there's a problem as you get older and you're working in that way and you start worrying about that sort of thing. And I think that I certainly have noticed myself as I get older, I don't care so much. And that is another kind of freedom, you know, to just be able to create what you want to create and not care about how it's received or who it's received. And I realize, you know, if you're depending on funding, then, you know, you still have to worry about an audience. But I know, Millie, at one point you had said that you wondered who were you creating for an audience that was just you know, who did you know that you're creating for an audience and you didn't even know who they were?
It was at the end of the 60s. I'd been painting for, well, let me see, it was in the 70s, actually, early 70s. I'd been painting for almost 10 years by that time. And I had this opportunity, but I was also a little bit isolated. I had gone from Toronto to Montreal, where I spent 3 years, and then got a teaching job in Barrie at Georgian College. And Barrie, certainly in those days, an hour north of Toronto, nobody was interested in coming and visiting my studio. I didn't have a gallery in Toronto at the time, and I couldn't entice anybody to come up and see what I was doing. And a friend of mine had a studio downtown on Queen Street. She was leaving for a month and offered me the use of her space. Why don't you bring all of your paintings down here so that you can show them to people? So I had this space for a month, and I had 2 days off a week. And I set about inviting artist friends, curators, galleries, anybody I could think of that was interested in, that might be interested in my painting, down to the studio, and took a truckload of work with me. And I had the experience of sometimes having 2 or 3 appointments booked with people in one day, which gave me a really a close example of being able to evaluate what they were seeing. I could anticipate. I learned that I could anticipate what they were expecting to see before I even brought the next works out. So I learned a lot about perception, of course, and but I also got to look at my own work over and over and over again. And I grew more and more dissatisfied with it. And I thought it was just driving me crazy. What's the problem here? The problem was, I realized I have been painting for some imagined audience. And So I spent, that was a really important realization. I spent the next couple of months trying to work through it. And then finally I did a painting that I would call pivotal, that just totally broke me loose from the work that had been developing up to that point. And so that made me feel so confident. I stretched out a canvas and took all of the paint that I had, mixes. I had keep mixes of paint all the time. Took all the mixes that I already had, added a few new elements to what I called the arsenal, and decided that I was going to cover this canvas in one fell swoop, which I did. And acrylic paint, as you know, dries really quickly. You can work on it in stages, or you can do everything all at once. And for a long period after this episode, I did do just about everything all at once. This particular canvas, the very first one, happens to be in the collection of the Canada Council Art Bank. Actually, now it's at the American Embassy, which that's great. But the canvas, I covered the canvas with the thought, I'm going to go in the next morning. It's a 6x6 canvas, or 5x6, something like that. I'll go in the next day after everything is dry and see what needs to be done. And when I went in the next day, I got up on the ladder to look down on the canvas stretched on the painting board on the floor. And I studied it for a very long time, and finally realized it doesn't need another thing. And it was such, wow, what an awakening, just to realize that I had that kind of intuitive, I'd absorbed enough through all the explorations I'd been through to that point. I'd absorbed enough that I could work that way, that I could just let it all out and that it would work. So that was a dam breaking. And it also meant I am going to do whatever I'm going to do. I don't know what is going to be next, not even necessarily painting, even though that's where I've stayed. It wasn't ever going to be lodged in one kind of a groove. You know, like, it's interesting. I can say that, and I always have been wide open to other possibilities of working. But the drive that I have in this particular direction always takes over. But yeah, I called those my shit or bust paintings. And it was a great long period. And then eventually I started getting back into a few more control elements, and they moved on. They morphed into other things as it goes.
Thanks. And Marie-Josée or Peter, have you found, as you've, you know, as your career's gone on, that you've become less worried about what other people think of your work? Yes, Marie-Josée.
Well, I think it's quite different, if I may say, when you're in the performing arts, because it lives at the moment that it lives, and then it's gone. So you do have to care about your audience, not compromise what you want to do, but it's going to be the one time or two shows or three shows in my lane of work anyway. And it doesn't exist after that. It's not somebody, like, you walk in a gallery, you know your work is there for 2 months, or you have a book, a film, people can go back to it. You don't know who that audience is. You know, not that I know who the audience is every time, but there is a very, very live exchange that's happening. So hopefully, I always want to do what I want to do, but I also have to be really aware of that I'm sharing, communicating in the moment what's happening. So I think it's an extra challenge, because I don't even want to talk about dance on film. I mean, that became like ubiquitous in the COVID. And for me, dance lives in the theater, lives in the live, not a theater, but lives in the live space, because that's where the energy is happening, because you actually need that audience. It just has it feeds off. And you learn from it too, because especially when you perform in different cities, different countries. If you perform at home, if you show your work at home, people have a context in which to look at your work. But it's really tough if you travel and people don't know you at all, and they see at face value, and that's the reaction. That's what you find out at that moment. So it is very informative, because you kind of, you realize maybe certain things don't speak to all the audiences, but unfortunately, it's very hard to go back to it and learn from it. You only learn from it when you have a chance to do the work more than 2 or 3 times. So you work months for production, sometimes years. And just the situation with contemporary dance or even contemporary opera, it's shown 1, 2, 3 nights. You might be lucky to go on tour. So it's, yeah, it's a tricky, it's a tough one. It's a tough one, because, yeah, I still care a lot about what I do, but I also care a lot about not what people think, but what it is that I'm doing. But when you come down to writing grants and, being presented, well, if it's not, if it's not the cup of tea or whatever, it's really, really hard to continue just, anyway.
Right.
A lot of aspects to this question.
Well, I don't know much about it, dance, but your comments triggered something that I think is an interesting observation about aging artists. Consider the career of one of the biggest artists in the world, Mick Jagger. Now Mick Jagger is now 80 years old. Is it not strange that he is still an incredibly athletic dancer, prancing across huge stages all over the world with incredible athleticism? And yet, the other aspect of his art, songwriting, has completely atrophied. One would think that if we were back in 1965, the expectation that Mick Jagger would be still dancing in 2024, and yet apparently unable to do what would seem like the simpler task, the more sedentary task of songwriting, which he has not really done for 40 years.
Right.
Unusual. So there's mysteries about this whole business of the aging artist.
True. So I'm aware that our time is rolling to an end, and I'm just wondering if you have some advice or a perspective on resilience and adaptation as you'd like to share in terms of maintaining your creativity and overcoming change and challenges as you get older as an artist.
Well, I'll just jump in quickly. I think curiosity is really a big one. Just kind of, you just kind of have to keep, for me anyway, just keep going, being curious. I love to look outside my discipline. I learn a lot more when I look outside of what it is that I do. I get a lot more inspired, and I connect a lot with people. And, I've said yes to a lot of projects that at first I thought, well, I don't know, oh, why not? And then most of the time, it's turned out to be relationships, artistic relationships that now have lasted 10, 15, 20 years, because I said yes the first time, not really knowing. So I do like to take chances, take risks, and if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But I think this is how I was able to make a lot of like webs of connection and learning a lot about different art forms and learning a lot about people. And the other aspect, if someone has the means, is to travel. But I've had a chance to travel through Dancing with Companies, but also with all the other works that I've been involved, that has taken me all over the world. And I always manage to often to take extra time after to, to be in a new culture. So that gives me a huge amount of energy of being around. But that's also, I realize it's also part of my personality. So, yeah.
Well, the first thing you have to have, as you pointed out earlier, is economic freedom.
Yeah.
Because without that, we wouldn't be able to indulge in any of this. So in my case, if there's any younger people out there that are watching, all I can say is the three things that made it possible for me to be doing what I'm doing today. One are unions. Without the benefit of the Directors Guild, the Writers Guild, and other unions, I wouldn't be able to do this today. Secondly, retirement plans, which were so important. And thirdly, royalties, which thankfully last forever. So those are the three things. If it's too late for that, my other trigger today is hang out with younger people. That's what I believe in. I try and hang out with 40-year-olds or younger, and they keep you young.
Billy, your thoughts?
Well, performing artists have a much more complicated scenario to deal with. The economic funding for making a film or doing dance it's so totally different than what I do as a visual artist, as a painter, working alone, not collaborating, not in partnership. I think the most important thing from where I sit is keeping your mental and physical health and fitness top of mind. I think it has to be more important now. The things that you got away with doing in your 20s and 30s, they're long gone. Can't do that anymore. So if you want to stay in the game, you got to keep yourself in shape for it. Continue to challenge yourself. And if it's not, there's lots of different ways of doing that. There's lots of different ways of challenging yourself. And even for dancers, choreographers, filmmakers, writers, there's lots of different ways of changing it up. But you have to continue to do it. And remember that, like life itself, art making is an ongoing, always changing process.
Fabulous. Thank you. Well, I really want to thank all three of you today for sharing your thoughts and wisdoms and the stories of your life with us. It's been really important. And I think, some of the questions that the breakouts might look at is, where do they find their inspiration? How do they manage the limitations of age or of resources? And where can they go next? How do they get over these things? I know that one of the things that what Marie-Josée, you said it about exploration with other disciplines. It's really important. And Peter, hang out with younger people too. you need to know what's going on in the world. Even if you can't travel, you can talk to other people who can. And you know what? Who says you're not supposed to be doing what you're doing, or who says you're supposed to be doing, what you're doing? It's what you want to do. And there are ways around that. So I'm going to thank you, all three of you, very, very much for this. And I'll hand it back to Scott.
Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you, Amanda Hancox, our moderator. Thank you, Marie-Josée Chatier, Millie Ristvet, and Peter Rowe. So it's time to get into our breakout groups. And as Amanda said, let's talk about where you find your inspiration. Let's talk about how you manage the limitations of age. Let's talk about where are you going next. So each breakout will have a facilitator who will help lead the discussion, and we'll get back together here in about 40 minutes from now. So enjoy your breakout. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, let's find out what everybody was talking about. I can start. My group was really interesting. A lot of visual artists, but some musicians, a couple of filmmakers, and living everywhere from Surrey, BC to Nova Scotia, Toronto, and up to Rankin Inlet in Nunavut. So it was a nice geographical spread, and we talked mainly about inspiration. And some of the points that came up, I said, where do you get your inspiration from? And one person said, everywhere, all the time. It's all around you. For a visual artist, that's understandable. For the rest of us, maybe not quite so obvious, but the environment is always inspirational. In fact, Teresi Tungalik, who's from Nunavut, from Rankin Inlet, she told us a great story about how her son wanted to learn to carve, wanted a piece of soapstone so he could start carving when he was very young. And she got him a piece of soapstone, and he started filing away with it. And she said, what are you working on? Because she said that, the Inuit always create from Arctic animals or their environment. And her son said, I'm making an elephant. He had been watching Sesame Street and seeing an elephant, and that was his inspiration. So she said, generational inspiration is always welcome. Talking to other artists is another one, and that gave me a perfect way to segue into Friday, which is going to be our chapter 3, in which we will be talking about mixing the generations, mentoring, and creativity. One other thing, Nina Keough said that she keeps her phone beside her bed, and when she is going to sleep, she gets some inspirations. She says, hey, Siri, send Nina Keough an email with a list of the things that she just thought about. So I thought, wow, that beats a pad and a paper by your bed. So that's something else to think about. Let's find out who else we were hearing from. I believe Dan Lyon is about to join us. Dan, come on down.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining our conference and our breakouts. We had an eclectic group of musicians and commercial artists, a dancer, people into graphic design, and we found ourselves talking. We jumped the gun a little bit into Friday's subject, because as I think Scott also had hinted at, a lot of people find inspiration in the intergenerational collaborations. And whether a mentorship is formal or informal, there does seem to be a lot of that going on. One of the questions that came up is that when you're developing a portfolio approach and trying to learn new things at whatever age, do you go and seek out a mentor? And for most people, I think there's a kind of natural collaboration that happens, but less formal mentorships. One person actually runs a group where there are younger mentors who are expert in their artistic discipline, and they are helping to educate and spur the enthusiasm for some of their elders. So that's interesting. We spoke a bit about how wide these portfolios are, and they really are, pretty impressive. A lot of people are into teaching. So teaching itself, I don't think, is an artistic discipline, but it's another way of keeping your hand in and getting inspiration, usually from younger people. But we have, musicians into singing and painting, and we have visual artists into dancing and filmmaking and singing, and there's every combination that you could possibly imagine. And one of the things we found ourselves, talking about is that when you're first starting, you don't necessarily feel the pressure that people are going to be paying to see your work or experience your work. And so there's a little less pressure, and you can enjoy it. You can enjoy the experience of learning without the huge pressure of needing to be a professional in the new field. So a lively discussion, and I think I will stop there.
Thank you, Dan Lyon, and thank you also, Dan, for chairing the programs committee at CAN, which is responsible for what you have been seeing today and on Monday, and we'll see you again on Friday. Dave, if you could bring Tracy Hoyt in.
Okay, hello.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Scott. Great to see you.
Likewise.
I took many notes. Let's hope I can read some of them. We did get through all three questions. We did spend a lot of time on the first one. We had an interesting group, a lot of visual artists. A couple of us were performers. One of the women was a clown, arts and culture policy person in the group as well, Gary. And the first question, when we were talking about inspiration, things that were, I'm just going to read off the list here. The land, new landscapes, music, travel, staying curious, being with younger people like grandchildren, getting into what they're into, sharing, collaborating with other artists, connecting, trying new disciplines. All of those things kept coming up in all of the conversations. In terms of challenges, in terms of limitations of aging and finances, one person really clearly expressed how, and I really noticed this during the pandemic, we didn't realize how much of a hustle we were experiencing until things stopped. And coming back from the pandemic, realizing, we don't have the same energy that we used to have, and navigating all of that, how that gets harder. And some of the solutions that were coming up that people are finding helpful are just, again, sharing your art when you're having those moments of, can I really do this? Daring to share, daring to ask for help, daring to connect with other people. Someone shared that it's harder to have your independence when physical things change, when medical things happen. Having supportive people in your life who not only can help you physically, but also who get you as an artist and who you can safely trust with your art. That was really poignant, that part of the conversation for me, because I think, especially when artists are working in isolation, it can get very hard to ask for help. And connection is, asking for connection is so vulnerable, but we need, as several people have mentioned today, we need that audience. We need someone to check in with, to see how we're doing, even if it's just the very beginning of a project. When we were talking about what's next, it was exciting. One of the participants shared that she's going to do an open mic. And I said, stand up, storytelling? And she said, no, singing and playing music. And I just thought that was amazing, that theme of trying something new, like keep stretching as an artist. Someone else said to keep teaching, to keep sharing and teaching your skills, mentoring, of course, that's going to be the topic on Friday. One visual artist mentioned that she's in an artists in community group. They get together twice a month, and it's been a 5-year relationship, this group, and like that becomes such an important touchstone for people to connect. So we could have talked all afternoon. I could go on and read more messy notes, but that's all I'll share. It was very inspiring.
Thank you, Tracy Hoyt. Jan Miller was facilitating one of the breakouts. Let's find out what Jan and her group talked about.
We just had such a lovely conversation with everyone. They were across the country, a variety of disciplines, including a Métis voice, which was essential to what we were talking about and invaluable for us. It was interesting because our group, I went to the first person, and what they identified right away as something they were struggling with is finding themselves from a very active artistic life and then being isolated in an apartment building on the 4th floor in a town in Ontario, and how hard that was. And our community of voices around the Zoom room was remarkable, how every single person leapt to offering suggestions to help this artist move outside of that sense of isolation. And in the end, that artist said, "Oh, I can't wait to get started on some of these ideas." So it was really, really inspirational. What we did at the end of this conversation is I asked everybody to come up with one word that is their takeaway, because that's something that was really important to us as a programming committee, that we wanted people to have takeaways. And so these are the words that came from our group. One was the importance of community, and community can be defined by someone within your own discipline or someone that supports you in your discipline, but seeking community. It can be through volunteerism. It can be through setting up your own writing group or your own musical exchange, but the community is so important. And whenever you feel isolated, think about how you can reach out to community or create a community for others to reach. The importance of empathy, you really saw that in this group as everyone candidly, authentically talked about how they addressed a sense of loneliness or isolation, that they walked away with inspiration, that everyone in the Zoom room felt that they were inspired to look for new ways to pursue their art or explore their art or expand their art. This sense of unlimited possibilities, it really is. I mean, even as we may manage limitation, there are unlimited possibilities. And one of our group talked about tackling technology so that it worked for them to reach out to a larger community. And she didn't see that as a limitation. She saw that as an opportunity and unlimited possibilities. A lovely point that is just so important is self-awareness and self-care, and taking the time through meditation or yoga or walking or reading a book that we become self-aware of what we need to feed our creativity, and then allow time. Journaling was another example. Allow the time within our world to take the time for that self-awareness and self-care. The importance of intergenerational exchange, working with younger people. One of our people said that I go out to work with younger people, or I teach. That's another way. I think it is very creative. And then the importance of interconnectivity, that all the disciplines can feed another discipline. And the last one is the importance of joy. And we ended the whole session with this lovely quote, actually from Claudia: "Trees in the forest look after each other, so can we." So that was our.
I love that. Thank you, Jan, and thank you, Claudia, for sharing that. You mentioned, Jan, community, and that is so important. And that's why we refer to all of you as our community of artists at the Canadian Artists Network. And don't forget, we have regular community meetings we call online salons or on salons, the next one coming up on November the 12th. Okay, how about Nikita Carter? Nikita.
Another fun day, an interesting day, both with the panelists and with our breakout group. We had 9 participants, so it was a big group. So there was, it was very dynamic. We had performers, various kinds of performers on stage, acting and music, visual artists and writing, a wonderful mix. And how is aging and life-directed change in your creative process? One of the things that came up in a number of different ways was trying new things within and outside of your discipline. I kind of paraphrase some of the things. And I think that that's just going deeper and then going more, going broader, which I think is kind of encapsulates a little bit. Where do we find inspiration? Young people, community, to bring that word up again, new avenues to explore, I guess, again, different disciplines or related disciplines. Nature is another one that was very powerful for one of our speakers. Managing limitations, shifting expectation in our life around different roles and responsibilities, raising families, having careers, all this kind of health issues, dealing with depression and aloneness, and dealing with kind of in a hybrid way, working in other ways. Finding resources that we talked about it, I guess, in different kinds of ways. Meditation, Qigong, resources like the Canadian Artist website. I mentioned a couple things about the richness of marketing advice and social media and how to use those things. So many different kinds of resources in the website and the resources is just taking the risk to try learning new things and being open. I framed failure as learning. And I think that that's everybody we can all relate to that, is you try something and it doesn't work the way you expected. And you get up off the mat and try it again and see what you learn and where you go with it, what it teaches you. And I think that that's where next, where can you be taught? Not just mentoring, but where can you continue to learn? What new things, what new mentors can you find? What new questions can you ask? And I think where next, it was kind of a variety of things. People are trying, a new book or different performance, instead of doing large productions, doing smaller productions and working with young people. It's kind of felt like people just talked about the ongoing process of where they're being directed and following where that takes you, but staying engaged in the disciplines that entice you, So it was a wonderful, rich group of people who were very generous in their sharing. So it was a lot of fun. I had a smile on my face a whole bunch of the time. So
always a good sign, Nikita. Thank you.
It is.
Okay. I think, unless I'm wrong, Dave, that we've covered all of the breakouts.
We have covered all the breakouts.
We have indeed covered all of the breakouts. So thank you to the facilitators for those very, very succinct summations. Some really interesting things came out of that. Some interesting themes that seem to be similar in each breakout: community, generational exchange, that sort of thing, finding inspiration in nature and the environment. And that pretty much wraps things up for Chapter 2 of Creativity Forever 24. Thank you for joining us. I hope you'll join us Friday for Mixing the Generations, Creativity and Mentoring. It's not just about mentoring, it's about exactly what we were talking about, that intergenerational exchange, how we find it, how we encourage it. And registrations for Chapter 3, if you haven't already joined us, close at midnight tonight. So thank you again for being with us today. It's been wonderful until we meet again, which I hope will be on Friday. We wish you health, happiness, and creativity because, of course, creativity lives forever.